All right. How about we start this session with a test? Now, no worries here. This test is not going to be hard. But what I want you to do is I want you to rate yourself ethically on a scale of 1 to 10. 1, you're not ethical at all. 10, you're absolutely ethical. 5, you're in the middle. So go ahead, give yourself a number. How many of you gave yourself a number higher than 7? Let's hear you clap if you gave yourself a number higher than 7. That's it. We got a lot of 7s out there. You know, I've asked about 3,000 people this question, and 95 to 98% of them say I'm a 7 or above. But when I was with the FBI, I specialized in financial crime, white-collar crime, embezzlement, fraud. And what I found is that a lot of the people who I investigated were ordinary people just like you, just like me, your neighbor, your colleague, your coworker. And so now, I'm going to say something that's probably going to surprise you. Looking at this scale right here, I am a 5. In reality, I'm probably a 4. And I think by the end of this session, by the end of our time together, I think you're going to find out that you are closer to a 5 than what you care to admit. So, are you ready for the next part of the test? Let's do it, right? So in this one, I'm going to give you a behavior. And what I want you to do with these behaviors right here is judge them on how bad they are. 1, not bad at all. Who cares? 10, whoa, that is bad. Hold on now. 5, in the middle. So here comes your first behavior. How bad is it to share your Netflix password with someone outside your family? Oh, I hear the laughing. I see the faces right now. Remember, FBI taught me nonverbal. There may be a few guilty people out there, right? When I ask this question of people, I usually get a run of answers between 1 and 10, but predominantly, I get people that say, it's a 1, it's a 2, 3 at most. And then they give me the excuses. They're like, everybody does it, so who cares? And then it's like, I paid for my Netflix subscription. It says, I can do whatever I want with it because I paid for it. And then finally, I usually get, it's Netflix. They're not even real. Who cares? So keep that in mind because I'm going to ask you a second question. I want you to use the same scale that we're using right now. How bad is it to go into a local restaurant, order food, eat it, and leave without paying? Even though you have the means to pay, the food was fine, the service was fine. It's a classic dine and dash. What number would you give that? How many clap are allowed if you're going to give it above an 8? There we go. So you're telling me that's really, really bad, isn't it? Why? If we look at both those behaviors together, aren't they both stealing? But yet one is accepted. You'll say Netflix 1, 2, or 3, but a dine and dash, that's a 10. That's bad. You don't do that. And so as I started working my cases in the FBI, one of the things that just fascinated me was how did people do this? How could they come into work and just say, hey, how you doing? And in the meantime, they're stealing the company blind. And I became fascinated. I wanted to know how. And so I started looking into these things. And what you just experienced is something called psychological distance. And it's a mental construct. It's our ability in our brains to create a distance between our decisions and the consequences of those decisions. And so when you think of Netflix, like that's not even a real person. But when you see that waiter, that waitress, all of a sudden that becomes very real. So now I want you to imagine this for me. Imagine that you are in an amusement park and you see a family up ahead of you, about 50 feet ahead of you, husband, wife, whoever it is, they got their wallet out, they get something out of their wallet, they put it in their pocket, their purse, their backpack, whatever they have, and as they place it back there, it falls on the ground. You yell at them, but they don't hear you. So you finally get up to that spot where the wallet fell, you bend down, you pick it up, and as you pick it up, you see it is loaded with cash, $100 bills. How many of you are going to return that wallet with all the cash intact? All of you, right? All of you. I have no doubt. But let's contrast that with this. You're going to the amusement park with your family, but you hate crowds. So you go an hour late because you don't want to deal with the rush of people coming in. And so you have to park a little bit farther back, and it's a windy day, but as you come up to them, you come up through the cars, you look in between two cars, and you see something moving, something blowing in the wind. And it catches your eye because it's green. And you bend down, you pick it up. It's 3 fresh $100 bills. You look around. Nobody's there. How many of you are going to be like me and end the investigation right there and put that money right in my pocket? Right? That's what we're talking about with psychological distance. We create this mental distance in our head that makes it seem there is no victim. When you think of Netflix, that they don't matter, they're not real. So what you're doing is you're denying a victim. What I want you to do right now, think about the organization you work for. Think about the organization you want to work for. What is the first image that pops in your head? Because if it's a logo, a slogan, a product, then you may have already created the psychological distance you need to rationalize your behavior. Whereas if you thought of a colleague, you thought of a client, you thought of a person, that makes it a little bit different. That's like the waiter or the waitress when they're right in front of you. So now, if you're ready, I've got one more behavior for you. How bad is it to exceed the posted speed limit? How many of you are going to say negative numbers on this one, right? Right? But then again, if we look back to the workplace, our workplace is full of rules, policies, and procedures. Are we allowed to choose which ones we want to follow and which ones we don't? And what this is called is denial of injury. Yeah, I'm breaking the speed limit, but I'm not hurting anybody. But aren't speed limits put in place to protect people from accidents and even death? And so I started thinking, like, how do they go home at night and not feel bad? What goes on in their brains that make them say, it's okay that I'm doing this? And so I ran across an author by the name of Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, actually won a Nobel Prize in economics for the book. And he describes the brain in 2 different ways. The first one is, he calls it System 1. Okay? And so imagine this. Imagine you're on a country road, it's late at night, sun's going down, but you still have light. You're going about 30, 40 miles an hour. You come around the corner and you see a deer in the middle of the road. What are you going to do? Are you going to honk? Are you going to stop? Are you going to brake? Are you going to swerve? Or if you're like me, I'm going to speed up and hit it. Then I'm going to take it home and eat it. Right? So in that moment, did you just react to the stimulus in front of you? Kahneman calls that System 1, your reactionary brain. Then he has this thing called System 2, and how many of you have ever had the wonderful experience of buying a car and negotiating with that salesperson back and forth, and you consider, does this fit in my budget? Is this a fair price? And you use that brain you have to think. Kahneman calls that System 2. That is your rational thinking brain. And so now what I want you to consider, which do you spend more time in each and every day? System 1, your reactionary brain, or System 2, your thinking brain? And let's do another test. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Kahneman and other researchers have used this question to kind of illustrate the difference between System 1 and System 2. So as you know the answer, and most of you will know the answer, go ahead and say it out loud. Okay, here we go. How many of each animal did Moses take on the ark? 0. I hear some zeros, I hear some 2s. Whoever said 0 is correct. Because Moses didn't take anybody on the ark. It was Noah. System 1 makes 95% of your decisions every single day. And it does it on an unconscious level where you're not even aware it's happening. Those of you who chose 2, what happened? System 1 shot that answer to the front of your brain, and before you even thought about it, you said 2. That's the power of System 1. And it leads to something called bounded ethicality. It's described as the psychological pressures, the social pressures, and the normal processes of your brain that cause us to act in certain ways that sometimes are unethical without our knowledge. 2 professors, Dr. Max Baseman and Dr. Ann Brunzel, have done a lot of work on this. And what they found is that bounded ethicality, when we have an interest in an outcome, it causes us sometimes to deviate from our ethical baselines. In other words, it causes us to do things that we ordinarily wouldn't do. Dr. Brunzel also worked with an individual named Dr. David Messick, and they came up with a concept called ethical fading. And you see the definition right there. Ethical fading is when you, System 1 specifically, makes a decision and somehow your brain has taken the ethical dimensions out of the decision completely. And what we may be doing today in the business schools at this university, at universities all around the United States, all around the world, we may be inadvertently teaching our students how to make decisions with ethical fading, taking the ethical dimensions right out of it. And it's called a cost-benefit analysis. Yep, a cost-benefit analysis. I'm an accountant, and I know there's value in a cost-benefit analysis, but as you look at the calculation, you look at the cost, you look at the benefit, you make your decision. You don't always take the ethical implications of the decision. And so I take you to this case that has been researched over and over again. It involves a car called the Ford Pinto. And for those of you younger than me, the Ford Pinto with this strange-looking car that if you hit it from behind at 30 miles per hour or more, it exploded. And the people inside would suffer severe burns or even death. Here's the thing. Ford executives knew prior to creating the first Pinto that there was a design flaw and that this was going to happen. And they okayed the production of the Pinto anyway. And so as they looked into it, they said, how did this happen? They came down to that cost-benefit analysis. And they figured out that to fix the design flaw in the Ford Pinto, it would cost, are you ready? $11 per car. $11. Now, move that to today's dollars, it's a little bit more, but not too much. But when they did the cost-benefit calculation, the cost to fix the Pinto was way more than the anticipated lawsuits, the anticipated brand damage. And so, what did they choose? They choose to manufacture the Pinto, and people died and suffered because of it. But if you look at the basis of the decision, that cost-benefit analysis, there was no ethical implications. But if I could have asked the Ford executives one question that would have brought the ethical dimensions right back in front of their face, I would have asked them, says, imagine that your 16-year-old son or daughter comes up to you and says, Mom, Dad, I'd like to get a Pinto for my 16th birthday. If you were the Ford executives who had this information, what would you have said to your kid? That ain't happening. But you see right there how the ethical dimensions all of a sudden can come into play if we think about them. So what can we do as people to make sure that we don't go down that unethical path? We don't succumb to ethical fading. And one of those ways is to generate multiple perspectives. How many of you have ever made a decision, or you're talking to somebody and you made a comment that says, wow, you know what? I hadn't thought about that. One of the things that you can do as a person is when you come to a decision, ask yourself, what would happen if I made the exact opposite decision? Or what would happen if the decision I'm about to make would affect me? How would I feel if I had to suffer the consequences? Because that would change your perspective. Another method that you can do to create these multiple perspectives is have somebody, a colleague, a friend, someone you trust, be your devil's advocate. President Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs invasion, a massive failure, realized that they had not generated enough perspectives, and so they made a bad decision. He went to his brother Robert, the Attorney General of the United States, and he gave him this instruction. He said, Robert, your job from this point forward is to find out how I'm going to decide on any topic, and then argue the exact opposite, even if you don't agree with it. And what he was doing is trying to generate perspectives that he hadn't thought of, looking at the problem from multiple formats, trying to see different ways to handle it. And if you do that, research shows that you're more likely to make ethical decisions. Two other professors, Dr. Mariam Kuchaki, Dr. Sridhari Desai, did some interesting work in organizations. And what they did is, imagine your workplace. They put up pictures of moral leaders. People that, if you look at their picture, you accept them as moral leaders. People like Gandhi, people like Mandela. And they studied the ethical profiles of the organization after they put up these pictures. And guess what happened? Unethical behavior dropped. Because you see, when we're reminded of our morality, we act more ethically. So if you can find a way to remind yourself that you are a moral person, you may stay true to your ethical baselines. And isn't that what you want? I spent 25 years of my life as an FBI special agent putting people in jail. I want to spend the next 25 trying to keep people out. And so if you empower people around you to give you the opinion that you may not want to hear, you empower the people around you to generate these different perspectives, and you remind yourself that you are a moral person, then maybe we can overcome psychological distance and ethical fading. And maybe we can make better decisions. And if we make better decisions, can we make this a better world? Now, I've got one last question for you before we go. How ethical are you again? Thank you, everybody.